after I landed here, I got to know about the realities of this particular economy, because what they showcased on the internet, on the promotional video, was something completely different. When I landed here, I got to know that there is a big housing crisis that's going on.
So I chose culinary management because I wanted to get into the food industry, but I faced severe difficulties in finding a job.
So they make us study at the Cineplex Theatre. उनके पास जगह ही नहीं है कि वो यूनिवर्सिटी में हम accommodate करें.
बहुत हो गया मेरा कनेडियन एक्सपीरियंस. मैं ना यहाँ का रह पाया, ना मैं वहाँ का रह पाया. So I finally decided that I'll move back to India.
Now, during this entire standoff with Canada that India is facing, one concern on top of many people's mind is what happens to Indian students, and lakhs of them who are increasingly going to Canada for their studies, and several of them actually go with the intention of settling down in Canada and becoming a Canadian citizen at one point. Now, as it stands, there is no effect on any visas for Indians going to Canada, but we don't know where this episode will go. But what this episode has also done is shine a light on the entire Canadian education system and industry, which is attracting a lot of Indian students for studies, but also with a view to settle down in Canada in future. So what's really the reality of that system, and is it really living up to everything that young Indian students are aspiring for? Well, very timely, a documentary made by young professionals, Borrowed Dreams, has come out even as we are witnessing this standoff. And I'm in conversation with not just the team that produced that documentary, but also some of the students who've been featured in that film.
Is the Canadian dream crumbling and its reality exposed?
So joining me in our studios is Yashwarya Mehta, CEO at Insight Media, who directed the movie. I'm also joined by Arjun Kumar Singh from Center of Policy Research and Governance, the research partners on this effort. Namra Shukla is a student who's been featured in this documentary, who's actually left Canada and come back to India, and we'll talk to him more about that experience. But Yashwarya, I wanted to start with you. When did you exactly decided you wanted to make this documentary, and what was the triggering point? Why did you focus on Canada?
So one thing was from which college I belong from. Even Vrinda is from Manipal, even I'm from Manipal. So there was a wave which we could see कि students are opting for Canada now, okay, and we have a bunch of people who are into tech, they are preferring Europe, and ऐसा एक हमें एक pattern दिखता. So now what happened is कि we started assessing. Even I got inspired कि let's go to Canada now. I'm done with my graduation. What should be done next? I have bunch of options to look into, but this is one thing which is getting marketed to me a lot, and I just thought of checking it again. Everything which has been told to me. Right, the experience is amazing, the jobs are there, the opportunities are there, but these are very bleak terms, right? You need to look into it thoda properly. So I started comparing this particular side, the skill set which I have today, can it be used in Canada or not? The answer was a big no. Okay. So if I go today to Canada and for a course, I will have to do a low paid job somewhere. I'll have to be in a cafe, I'll have to be a pizza delivery boy, or something which I might not really prefer to do here after graduation.
Regardless of what degree you go for.
Yeah, because it's not a Canadian experience, right? Canadian work experience. So they apparently, they are not aware, or they don't rely on some experience which is from other countries. Okay. But they prefer only Canadian work experience.
So when did you start working on this documentary? Because it's come at a time when the India-Canada standoff is going on, and many people would wonder whether this is a hit job of sorts.
No, it's not actually a hit job. I wish I could share my sheets, how I make documentaries. So I started working around it in March itself. Okay.
And so well before the standoff started.
Exactly. And the point was I had to connect with the right students. I had to express a certain pain as well as the aspect of it, right? So Vrinda was taken up because healthcare had to be answered. Namra was taken up because his story had the whole scenario of what all can happen to you once you start staying there, and eventually what can trigger you to come back. Right. So
Vrinda is one of those students who's also been featured in this documentary. We'll get a comment from her in just a bit as well. But Vrinda is an interesting story. She's a young Indian professional who spent a lot of money, as she talks about in this documentary, to go to a remote town, even in Canada, because she felt that would be a great town to live in. But she realized that, one, the facilities she was promised or she felt she would get for that kind of a costly degree were not there, and secondly, there were no job opportunities for her while she was studying, so she couldn't fund her studies when she was studying there.
I saw Cape Breton from what the CBU website shows itself to be, that there is lots of healthcare opportunities here, and that this is a very beautiful island. There's a short video you can see particularly on the website. It shows the beauty of the island, and it talks a bit about the success stories of a few students here. Those are the reasons why I chose Cape Breton for my immigration process, and this is where I wanted to come and immigrate and settle down in. Mind you, I wanted to settle down in Cape Breton.
Now I see colleges in Canada on islands. Okay? Every time I'm thinking that maybe when I'm there, I might have to take a ferry. I'll have to put too much money in just reaching these areas. But college aapko wo nahi batayega. College will show that, hey, it's close to Toronto. Or hey, it's close to this major city. But there are only 4 major cities, right? How many people are you going to throw into that particular state economy? So that was one point which I think people don't really look into much. They overlook that. Can you actually travel that much?
The student experience, I do have to say, is difficult everywhere. When you move out of your home or your main city, it's going to be a little bit difficult. But this documentary is shining a light on why it is particularly difficult in Canada. So I want to go across to Namra for that. Namra, you know, your experience as in this documentary is quite painful because the living conditions, the costs, just the climate, the fact that there were no avenues for you to advance in the career that you had chosen, all of them came together for you to eventually decide that you don't want to be in Canada anymore.
बहुत हो गया मेरा Canadian experience. I read something recently which said when you leave a country you become a stranger at 2 places. तो मैं ना यहाँ का रह पाया, ना मैं वहाँ का रह पाया. So now I finally decided that I'll move back to India.
So tell me first up, why did you choose Canada, and did you want to settle there eventually when you were deciding to study there?
Yeah, so that is a very good point, and I appreciate you bringing up the research part of it as well, because that is very true. Like, the students do need to research better, but I just want to highlight this part as well. So initially I wanted to get into culinary management, so I was looking for colleges across Europe. But then I did not find as many good options in the sense that the courses were too short. They were 11 months, they were 15 months, and I wanted to go for something that provided me a little longevity, which is why then I chose Canada, and I started looking for colleges in Canada. Now, when we talk about the research part, the thing is there's universities in Canada and then there's private colleges. The universities are very well accredited, but then the fee structure is so high that I don't think most of the people coming from other countries would be able to go in those universities. There are still people, but then that's where the colleges come in, right? When people, because I took a student loan and I had to finish my course in a certain amount, which is when I started looking for colleges. So it's very subtle the way this works. It's not really out in the open. And even if you do a lot of research, which I absolutely did on my part, but it's much more nuanced than that, and that's when I started looking for colleges, as I mentioned. Then I saw my culinary management courses, and I started seeing where these courses happen and which are the better colleges for these. That's when I landed in Georgian College in Barrie. Now again, one of the deciding factors for me was my fee structure, because I had to finish it in a certain amount. So that sort of cut down many colleges as well.
And how much was that? And how much was that amount that you took a student loan for?
So the fees were $40,000 for 2 years, which is 4 semesters. So my student loan was somewhere around 15 lakhs is what I remember. $10,000 you have to add more as a GIC, which is a mandate for any student going to Canada. So roughly 50 to 60,000 for an average course would be the cost for pretty much everyone.
And what was the disappointing aspect for you? Why is it that you believe that the Canadian experience or the Canadian dream that is being sold to students, especially from India, is a false dream?
So there's way too many things that I would like to address with this one. Firstly, I had a few people come up to me after this documentary come out and say that this is not a place for somebody who's not hardworking or somebody who's not really aspiring for much. But that's not really true. I have worked very much, like I worked for 5 years in food industry because I did culinary management. First things first, when I landed in Barrie, it was a very small town. There's not too many things happening. It was socially distanced even before COVID happened. So it was sort of like a retirement community and a college town. So mostly just students. Secondly, because it was such a small city and not really, dependent around tourism, there were not too many options for like culinary management, what I did. So there were not too many job opportunities for me once I finished. And the same goes for pretty much everyone in my course. None of us stayed in Barrie because we had to move out to look for a job. So that's something that was a disappointing factor first up.
They don't really warn you that, see, when you are done with your course or while your course or your degree, you might have to look for jobs outside of this small town.
Exactly. And even so what happens is you have a co-op term where you have to look for an internship where you have to work full time to pass your course. And even for that, there are just not as many job opportunities in Barrie. So to look for a job during your course is also very difficult, and you have to do that if you have to pass your course.
In the documentary you mentioned, you not only took this job at a pizza place, but you also worked 12-hour shifts, which almost left you as a zombie, because all the time that you had was for your shift and to sleep and eat.
Right. This is exactly during my co-op part. So during co-op you have to work 40 hours. You are allowed to work 40 hours. This has changed now, but when I was a student, you were just allowed to work 20 hours. So when you're working 40-hour shifts, it's pretty much, as you mentioned, I used to start at 3 p.m. and I used to finish late in the night, 1, 2 a.m. So I would just come back, get up the next day, eat some food and sort of go through the motion. And that happened for so long because this was a 4-month co-op that at the end of it, I just didn't know who I was. Like I was absolutely lost in the chaos of everything. I was absolutely lost in how monotonous it is. And again, restaurant or kitchen jobs are mentally and physically very draining
hard.
As well.
Yes.
Which is what most of the students do. Like, I think for me, the better part was that it was my field, which is why I was doing it very passionately and actually wanted to learn. But then there are people who are working, who are studying something completely different. They're studying finance,
it makes
but
no
they have
sense
to work
working in a restaurant or in a pizza delivery place.
Canadian colleges, universities, and immigration consultants paint a glossy picture of opportunities in Canada that is partly true. But it has failed to highlight the challenges an international student may have to face in that country's current socio-economic circumstances.
I want to bring in Arjun as well. Arjun, one of the things that this film highlights is that actually Canada does not have the economy or the facilities, not just at the university or the college level, but just as a country or in its different cities and towns to accommodate the number of Indian students that they're taking in. So there is not enough housing, and a lot of these students from overseas are cramped up in small apartments and 4 or 5 of them. Could you tell us more about that?
Canada is a country that has been experiencing stunted growth, economic growth over the years, I think since 2015 or 16 or so. In fact, there's a very interesting statistic that we found that since 2016, the number of unemployed Canadians with a bachelor's degree or higher education has always exceeded the number of vacant positions. So there's always going to be a mismatch. There was no way that in the coming years this could have been sort of drastically met. Even more interesting is the fact the number of unemployed Canadian-born individuals, they far exceed the vacant jobs available at all education levels. So this is something that needs to be established, needs to be reiterated, needs to be reminded that perhaps there are not enough jobs.
So what you're saying is that the Canadian population itself has too many unemployed individuals at high education levels, that for Indians to go there aspiring for a job at a certain level is going to be next to impossible. Is that the case? That Indian students are not going to get the kind of jobs that they think they're going to do in Canada?
Absolutely. I think that's a better way to put it. there is going to be a massive mismatch. One needs to be, of course, not just mentally prepared, but needs to take into account the right measure, maybe applying for the right universities, the right departments, right faculty members with those opportunities. I would also like to highlight the fact, something that was also just being spoken about. Several studies have pointed out that universities are not able to provide the services that they should be providing in terms of opportunities. Of course, in Western countries, we don't have the idea of placements coming in as such. But even basic services, even just sort of bringing in that connect between the industry and between the industry employers and the students is somewhere absent. Just to give a basic example, in 2018-19 in British Columbia, universities and colleges had a surplus of $340 million just from international student fee tuitions. So you're getting a lot of money from one chunk of students, but you're not able to provide services that these students want.
Yeah,
so
and I think speaking of those services, one of the most shocking aspect that was shown in the documentary was actually Vrinda's case, where she mentioned that actually a lot of the Indian students were bunched up together and their classes were happening in a cinema theatre close by because the university or the college where they were did not have the space to provide them appropriate classrooms. Let's just listen into Vrinda on that experience and more. Why the Canadian experience turned out to be a bit of a dampener for her and she actually left Canada and came back to India. Listen in.
यहाँ पर मतलब हमें एज अ कम्युनिटी साइड अलग करके रख देते हैं. फॉर एग्जाम्पल, लेट मी गिव यू एन एग्जाम्पल ऑफ व्हाट आई एम सेइंग. सो दे मेक अस स्टडी एट द Cineplex theater. We attend our classes in the movie halls, movie theater यहाँ पर. Because कि यहाँ पर जो यूनिवर्सिटी ने इतना बड़ा इन्फ्लक्स ले लिया, उनके पास जगह ही नहीं है कि वो यूनिवर्सिटी में हम अकोमोडेट करे. तो ये सारी चीजें भी काफी शॉकिंग होती है जब यहाँ पर आकर पता चलती है. Once you get there and you are promised by your immigration consultant agents that you are going to get a field job in the field that you are going to be studying. So I took healthcare management because as they say that there is a demand of healthcare workers in the Canadian healthcare system. But once you get there and you realize that there is a lack of skilled jobs for the healthcare workers. When I say skilled jobs, I was studying healthcare management. So I wanted to get into the administration part of the healthcare sector. There are job levels of NOC A, B, C and they're divided into the skill sets. So NOC C jobs are mostly the ones which you get in a healthcare setting, which is basically called a home healthcare worker or a patient sitter, which is almost equal to the job of a nanny, of a babysitter or of an elder sitter, a nanny's job. So that is not really a skilled job because I'm studying management aspects in my course and then I get a job which doesn't match my skill set. So that is also very disappointing because you're only stuck at a minimum wage job.
So this whole aspect of Indian students not being dealt properly in Canada, it's something they're already talking about. We are late. Right, so there are documentaries where she showed up, she tried to she spearheaded a whole campaign once she could while she was going through all this and there was Canadian media with her and eventually nothing was done. They made a whole advertisement, it's uploaded on YouTube, we have taken that particular clip and put that in even in our documentary that they are holding classes in Cineplex.
So they made it a good thing.
Yeah.
They tried to project it as a good thing.
The whole ad is like, yaar, main theatre mein ja rahi hu, this whole experience is amazing. Matlab literally PVR mein insaan ja raha hai, you get the whole canteen and everything.
One thing that I've seen in Canada is when there's a lot many people who would feel like they wouldn't really do well in their individual countries. They would feel like there's not enough opportunities and just because there's the currency difference, they would try coming to Canada and earning more money there. In terms of research, one thing I would definitely say is look for students who are already studying there or who have sort of graduated from that particular college to look for job opportunities because that was something that was missing on my part and that is something that I regret a lot. In terms of the advice, I don't think I would recommend anyone to sort of go to Canada. I know people would say that now that I've been there, it's very easy for me to say that, but that's primarily the reason that I'm saying that. The kind of difficulties I've faced in terms of getting a job even after I've graduated, because I've been there for 4 years and I graduated in 2021. The kind of hardships I faced in terms of getting a job, the weather situation, it's not discussed enough, but the weather is very harsh, and that's not something that's just very easy for us to get acclimatized to. A huge chunk of the year which is just spent with no sunlight, very difficult to travel in those conditions as well.
When the snow starts and the temperatures go as low as minus 40 degrees Celsius, it gets really difficult to survive.
I want to ask Arjun, why is it that so many students are looking at Canada? We have to look at this trend.
It's just because it's too trendy to go, as you also rightly mentioned. It's fashionable to go to a country that's cold, that sells you the dream of, okay, we'll have less people, we'll have larger homes, less crowded places, easier markets to access, and so on and so forth. One request here would be to all the audience listening here, people who want to go abroad or even Canada for that matter, is that our documentary is not a normative piece of media. It's not a moral value-laden document that tells you not to go to Canada. Rather, it just provides you with the realities that you might face there, realities that would not be prevailing in the popular narratives that you might come across social media, across friend circle, across the internet in general.
So if not Canada, if somebody really does want to go overseas to study, they don't feel they have the right options in India, how do other countries compare?
It's a good question. In the American continent itself, I think we have a powerhouse of higher education, the United States of America. That's always an option that seems reasonable enough. Traditionally, though, Indian students have been going to the European continent. Countries now like France and Germany have been able to provide a lot of opportunities. In Germany, I think a lot of times the tuition fees are very minimal, especially compared to Canada. Of course, language could be a barrier, and here is what makes this narrative a little easier to understand, that maybe because we're trying to overcome barriers such as language, we tend to pick options that seem a bit more fancy, seem a bit more appealing, seem a bit more trendy. But it could just turn out that something like learning a foreign language such as French or German could help us achieve the goals that we have set out ourselves for when we leave our motherland.
What is also happening in the case of Canada is that already a lot of people, especially let's say from the state of Punjab, they know people who've been to Canada. They know that they will have some sort of a familiar community to communicate with, because they feel like कि वहाँ पे अपने जैसे बहुत सारे लोग मिल जाएंगे.
There are too many reasons. It can't be just one reason. And it's not just Punjab anymore, it's Gujarat too. I'm from Gujarat, and I can see my whole society, a certain set of generation has left.
Right.
Okay, so if you look into it, why I really wanted to do it, I could see multiple reasons why I wanted to do it. And operation-wise, why it's happening at a wider scale was your question. So see, it's actually it's because of us only, because we are giving IELTS from quite some years, right? And if you observe the rates of IELTS exam, it's rising slowly by 1K, 2K, 3K, 4K. Now think about all the people who are migrating eventually, but a very large set is giving that exam. That's the fund generation happening. Now you have consultancies running in each and every part of this country. These are the companies which generate funds, so they have marketing money.
There is a whole industry working behind pushing Indian students to look for options overseas, and particularly in Canada. Is that what you're suggesting?
And even if I start, even if I open my phone right away, I'll start showing you reels, and there would be vox pop, okay? And एक Indian को select किया होगा वहाँ पे, and उससे पूछेंगे कि have you been to Delhi? नहीं, आप कहाँ से हो? तो वो बोलेंगे कि मैं दिल्ली से हूँ, मैं अभी कनाडा आ गई हूँ. Okay, what do you like about this place? Then they'll say कि यहाँ का हवा अच्छा है, यहाँ का पानी अच्छा है, यहाँ पे लोग हैं. I'm like, yeah, just I get it. Delhi is disappointing when it comes to weather, but not other places. I have been to a lot of IT cities, metropolitan cities. I have lived there, so I know in what way and where I could have been, where I could have had much simpler and cheaper way सारी facilities जो आप कनाडा में try कर रहे हो achieve करने का, and which you can't really own. You are having it on lease, and that is one thing nobody really shows when they are living there, right? So what do you make of the future of this Canadian experience or Canadian dream? Do you think more and more realization is now setting in that this is not maybe what you want? Yeah, and we need to communicate better. We actually need to understand there are too many challenges Canadian students are facing, and it's just because they haven't really set up a scope. Once the students are coming in, a country which hasn't even thought of how and where these students will sit for their class, do you really think they would have thought where they will go for a job?
Right.
And they shifted them into the whole low paid and low skilled jobs. and that is, I think, is not a right place for a graduate from in India, because they have put some money into it, and when they take up an opportunity after 4 years of graduation or 3, whatever time they put, it shouldn't be a low skill or unskilled job.
The truth of the dream might be far from the rosy picture being painted. Many are helplessly watching their hard-earned savings wasted, their hard work in the trash, and their dreams collapse.